Thank you for joining us today. Rachel introduced me. I'm Pamela Kirshner. I'm a board member of the Washington Conservation Guild. And I'd like to introduce you to Jennifer Jarvis. The title of her presentation is Surveying and Preserving the Women of the Book Collection at JHU. Johns Hopkins University's Women of the Book Collection contains nearly 1,000 books, plus manuscripts and other printed ephemera, produced between 1460 and 1800, and bears fascinating witness to the lives of nuns and holy women over 4 centuries in Europe and South America. The collection is currently featured in a major exhibition at the George Peabody Library through February 2023. Book and paper conservator Jennifer Jarvis and recent Conservation Fellow Laura McNulty have been performing an item-level survey of the bindings, repairs, and current condition of the bound materials in the WOTB collection. This talk will include an overview of the history of the collection, details about the binding and condition survey, as well as the treatment of 2 bound volumes from the collection undertaken by Laura. Jennifer Jarvis, presenter on behalf of herself and Laura, has an MA in Conservation Studies from the College of West Dean, University of Sussex, and a diploma in bookbinding from the North Bennett Street School in Boston, Massachusetts. From 2008 to 2011, she was the project director, chief conservator for the Derry and Raphoe Diocesan Library Project in Northern Ireland, and has since held positions at Columbia University and the Smithsonian Libraries. She has been a book and paper conservator at the JHU Sheridan Library since 2015. Laura McNulty recently completed a Samuel H. Kress Conservation Fellowship in the Department of Preservation and Conservation. In 2021, Laura received her Master of Science from the Winter University of Delaware program in art conservation, where she specialized in the conservation of archival and library materials. She has completed internships at the American Philosophical Society, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the National Museum of American History, the National Library of Medicine, and the Library of Congress. Her fellowship at JHU has been extended thanks to private donor funds. And now I'll invite Jennifer to come up.
Thank you, Pam. I safely cut several slides off of my presentation. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, as Pam said, and please tell me if you can't, if you're having trouble hearing me. I should not be the one giving this talk tonight. It should be Laura McNulty, who is our Kress Conservation Fellow. Her fellowship just ended, I guess at the end of this week, but thankfully we have her for at least 1 more year. So she should be here giving this talk tonight, but she gave birth to twins a few weeks ago, and so we can excuse her absence.
Slightly easier.
Yes, she has more important things to do. And as Pam said, this collection will be on exhibit at the Peabody Library through most of February. So if you're around, please go check it out. And as Pam also mentioned, I'm going to give a brief overview of the collection. I'm going to talk about the item level survey that Laura and I are currently, well, I guess not currently since she gave birth, but we will be continuing to work on when she comes back. And I'm going to keep an eye on the time, and if I have time, I'll go through one of the treatments that Laura recently completed on the collection. If I don't get to that, don't worry, Alessandro's talk is all about treatment, so there will still be treatment presented tonight. So, as Pam said, the Women's Book Collection is now roughly around 800 objects, including books, pamphlets, manuscripts, and ephemera. When it was originally purchased, it was about 450 items, and the curators have continued to grow the collection since about 2017 when it was originally The titles are quite rare. As you can see, 1/5 of the titles are unrecorded elsewhere, and 1/3 of the titles are not known to exist in other collections in the States. And another really important aspect of the collection is that about 90% of the collection is in vernacular languages. This is a collection that was for and about, and in some cases by nuns, and so you can understand why it was important that they'd be able to read books in the collections. So I'm going to just go through the kinds of books that are in the bound collection. We don't have to dwell too much on it, but just to give a sense of what's contained in the book. We have biographies, so biographies of nuns that were beatified, biographies of other significant holy women, sermons, so funerary sermons, sermons from processions or other kinds of events, and holy days. Rule and conduct books, there's a lot of those in the collection, so kind of telling the nuns how they're supposed to conduct themselves depending on what order they had joined. Oops. And then a couple of different kinds of pocket books, so daily devotionals where you could keep that on your person and make reference to it throughout the day. And then more formal processional volumes that would have been carried during holy celebrations and processions. There are roughly around, less than 100 single sheet items in the collection right now, although it's continuing to grow, so both on paper and parchment. Here's an example of a papal indulgence from the middle of the 16th century on parchment. And some of those are up in the exhibit as well, either in facsimile or original. This is a fun piece of ephemera that's up in the exhibit right now. This is referred to as a nun panorama. So the curator has speculated that this would have been presented to young, probably affluent women getting ready to decide which convent or which order they were going to pledge themselves to. And so you could kind of flip through and look at all the different habits and make your choice. Yeah. So I don't know if that's been verified, but that's what the curator is telling folks, so that's what I'm telling you. My favorite group of objects in the collection are besides the bound ones, of course, are the cluster arbite, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So this is a group of objects that were made by the nuns in order to sell to tourists and pilgrims, and the money made from the sale of those objects would have been used to fund the day-to-day operations of the convent. So here we have a couple of these now. Small format portraits. This is Gregory the Great. It's painted on parchment, and it's set in this, I apologize for the resolution of the screen, but it's set in this elaborate metalwork with some embroidered velvet and jewels. This particular item, I don't know if you can tell from the resolution here, was glued to a piece of plywood and then framed. It took Laura about 2 days to get it off of there, and at some point the frame obviously wasn't well sealed. There was a lot of insects that got in. They conveniently left all their damage underneath the portrait, so if you're looking at it head on, you wouldn't know that it's suffered a significant loss underneath the portrait, and it was filthy with dust and frass when we unframed it, so that was quite a dramatic undertaking. Some other examples of cluster arbite in the collection are these paper amulets, also referred to as breviers, mostly from Bavaria around the 18th century. So these objects were meant to be worn on a person, and they were supposed to provide protection from from physical and spiritual danger. So when you open them, so this one is beautiful, it has this paste paper cover, and then you kind of open it, and there's several layers of prayers and saints cards, and then when you get into the middle, there's this kind of lozenge of materials that have magical properties. So there's some gypsum in there, there's palm, there's some little saints tokens. And the important thing to say about these objects is that if you open them, they lose all their magical properties. So you're not supposed to open them, but it's amazing to think how intricately they were made for something that you weren't supposed to actually open. And if there's a few of these in the exhibit as well. And then this is just a one-off piece that's really lovely. In holy water stoup made of embroidered straw. It's got a lot of dirt on it, and it does need to be cleaned, but it's in the exhibit right now, so you can see at the bottom there's where the holy water would rest. And this was created by the Visiting order, which was a wealthier order, and so this might have hung actually in a nun's cell as opposed to only being sold to tourists. Receptacle for holy water down the bottom there. If you do get a chance to see this in the exhibit, it's pretty astonishing. I think the craftsmanship went into it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the survey. I don't think y'all were able to get a peek in the new library where this collection is housed. You probably saw the main library for the folks that went on the tour. So this has kind of been a little alcove off of the main library. And you can see the collection here. You can see a lot of parchment, and it's probably hard to tell from here, but there's not a lot of fine bindings. It's a lot of less expensive bindings, but a high proportion of them are in contemporary bindings. So Laura went ahead and created a database for us to use while we did the survey, and we're trying to capture how the books were bound, previous repairs, and their current condition. And this was really a priority for Laura for her fellowship. This is really the only way you get to train your eye to see all the different aspects of the different bindings. And so this was probably, for her, the highlight of the fellowship, getting to just sit with all the books and look at them one by one and really spend, sometimes 10 or 15 minutes with each book. Here's just a screenshot of the database so far. And please interrupt me if you have any questions I guess you guys like to stay. But anyway, I don't mind if you interrupt. Okay, so as I said, yeah, there's a high proportion of lace case parchment bindings in the collection. So especially like 17th and 18th century, just all the permutations. I don't know if, are there any other book conservators in the audience? Okay, so, but anyway, this is just a real treat to see all of the different ways that these particular kinds of bindings were constructed. So here you can see a spine binding that was made of printed waste, and that was the main of this image. Let's see, another example of a different kind of lace case parchment binding here. Just again, sorry if you're not a book conservator, it's a little possibly boring, but this is just showing a particular way of attaching the boards to the case, and it's just a good example of one way of doing it you don't see very often. With these nice cabled cords, sewing supports, which are also fairly rare. And then for Laura, just looking to see all of these details. So on the right here, you can see in the raking light the lacing pattern of the sewing supports into the binding, and then on the left here, I don't know if you can make it out with the resolution here, but you can see the kind of triangle cut out next to the rectangle, which is the end leaf guard used to attach the boards either before or after covering, depending on the construction of the binding. And so these two features here, the lacing and patterns and the pattern cutting of the end leaf guards, these are often really signatures particular to an individual binder, and so binding historians will use those kinds of patterns to either identify a particular binder or a particular workshop. Hey, Lauren. This is another really cool find for us. This is first half of the 16th century Belgian binding, and you can see here this parchment end leaf guard, which happens to be manuscript waste. This is the primary method of board attachment rather than lacing in the supports, which is what you think of for books bound in the hand press era. This adhesive guard attachment is known about, it's been written about, but it's not common, and so it was nice to see, it was especially nice for Laura to get to see an example in real life. And we did some research on this kind of binding, and of course found a little article in Pickwood who dates and places these bindings and exactly the geographic location and time period of this particular book. So you can kind of really in real time make those connections, especially with a recent graduate. It really brings those lessons home. So that was a real treat to find this. So what else did we look at besides the bindings? We recorded, these books are full of annotations, they're full of inserts, they're full of just all kinds of markings, so we made notes of all of that in the database. On the right here, you can see the shelf mark, not shelf mark, kind of contents here. So this was a pamphlet that, from the evidence observed while we were doing the survey, clearly came from a previously bound volume that was disassembled to sell as individual pamphlets. And the cool thing is that we were able to locate other pamphlets in the collection that came from the same binding just by tracing these markings throughout the book. And that was something that the curators were not aware of, and so we were able to kind of point that out to them, and which is obviously really useful for tracing provenance. And as well as all of that, these books are rich in library stamps. You can see in the middle there, a convent stamp just crossed out because somebody else got it, and other name inscribed in the top there. Some of the books just have 4 or 5 different library stamps from Italy, Austria, France. So that's really cool to be able to kind of trace the journey of these individual volumes. On the left there, you see a binder's ticket from one of the few books that did receive rebinding in the 19th century. On the left, and then on the right, a really beautiful booklet. So a lot of these books have really short journeys from the church properties where they lived to Hopkins, and so all of this provenance is still there, which is great. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the repairs that we've observed, and we're starting with my favorite, which is this stitched repair of these. It's about 4 or 5 tears in this book, and clearly this was done by someone who was used to repairing parchment manuscripts. It was the same technique used. And I've never seen that in a paper text book before, so that was really great and exciting. And another example of just the nuns using the skills that they would have gotten from other accomplishments in their life, using those same techniques and materials and methods to repair the books in their collections. So here is beautiful, neatly stitched board reattachment, which I just love. This example is a bit more messy. It's kind of hard to figure out what's going on here. But this is, to me, this is interesting because it seems it's clearly not done by a binder. There's like 3 or 4 different kinds of repair thread in there. So whoever repaired this was just using whatever scraps they had to execute the repairs. But they clearly also had some knowledge of how books were put together. So you probably can't see, I apologize for the resolution, but there was an effort made here to tack, to mechanically kind of reattach the end band to the text block, which is something you don't usually see. If that's done at all, it's usually done with glue. And then there's like a kind of spine stiffener to reinforce the spine stuff down there. So this is just an interesting kind of combination of a monastic repair that looks like it was also done by someone who knew a little bit about binding and how books were put together. And again, on the left there, you see another, this is throughout the collection, the nuns using whatever materials they had on hand to repair the books. So this is a joint consolidation here with a piece of velvet ribbon, which is really beautiful. And then on the right here, again, just to go back to Laura learning to train her eye, there's a lot of examples of this, which might look like nothing, but is an example of someone going in and basically inserting glue after the fact to reattach loose elements of the binding. And if you're not sure what you're looking at, you might think that was original to the binding, but it's not. And that's, once you know to look for that when you're going through the collection, you just see that everywhere. And those are things that are generally lost in other kinds of survey work that are tracking repairs. So that was my last slide on the repairs. I just am going to pause to, I wanted to acknowledge that this was a really sometimes difficult collection to survey, or heavy collection to survey. I don't know how much this comes out in the exhibit, but there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of women or girls dying at young ages of terrible illness. I think that we think, and this is true of women kind of escaping to the convent and getting some education, having access to books and reading materials, but we just came across all of these cases of suffering happening, or implied. It's all kind of nothing is explicit, but it's implied. So here, well, this is kind of explicit, this example. On the left here is a manuscript account of a case of 2 convertite nuns. So these are reformed sex workers who were able to join this convertite order, and in this case, 2 of the nuns ran away from the convent and were missing for almost a year, and then were found strangled in a basement. And so this is just a manuscript account of, I think, one of the trials. This has been written about by an academic. I think the name of the book is something habitual. Can't remember, but there is a book written about this case that was quite sensational at the time. And then on the right here is just an engraving of a chair that was used to inspect nuns coming in to pledge, to take the orders, to inspect them to make sure that they were virgins. So that is kind of unsettling to look at all of those things. Do I have 20 minutes?
It's 6:30.
It's 6:30, so should we go on, you go on with your talk? I think that's the end. The next slide is just going into the treatment, so I think we'll just pause there.
I'd like to introduce Alessandro Scola. The title of his presentation is Conserving and Preserving a 15th Century Italian Antiphonary, Non-Traditional Binding Conservation Techniques, and an Innovative All-in-One Housing Display and Moving Device. Alessandro Scola is Senior Book Conservator at the Department of Conservation and Preservation of the Sheridan Libraries and Museums, Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore. He trained in Italy at the Centro di Formazione Professionale in Cremona and in different private and public conservation labs in Italy and Spain, obtaining his 3-year book conservation certificate in 2005. Afterwards, he worked as private conservator in Treviglio, Italy, for a few years, and then joined the University of Ulster in Northern Ireland, UK, for a 4-year book conservation preservation project as conservation technician. In the US since 2012, he worked as contractor in New York City and interned in Washington, D.C. at the Folger Shakespeare Library before joining the Johns Hopkins University Libraries in late 2013 as a contractor first, and then staff member since June 2014. Awesome.
And Jane and I are married too. That was not in the biography, but actually she hired me in Northern Ireland. We got married there. Anyway. Change presentations. So, as you might guess from the title of my presentation, I will be talking about conservation treatment performed on the book, and now I decided to preserve it. I apologize in advance to all the non-book conservators in the audience, which all of you. I'm in trouble here, but no, hey, not be fun. Yeah, and some slides might be a little too technical, and the nuances of the techniques used might not be immediately apparent, but since we are all essentially problem solvers, I hope that you will enjoy the thinking behind the treatment and appreciate the practical solution implemented. So the 20 kilograms, which is more than 20 to 40 pounds volume, arrived in our lab in need of major structural repairs. Both wooden boards were almost detached, and the 2-layer leather spine was lifted and loose. The sewing structure was still functional, and the parchment text block was in decent condition. Only the non-contemporary paper fly leaves needed some immediate attention. This volume is the only medieval antiphonary on parchment in its period binding at the Johns Hopkins Library. It's used by researchers and students and displayed for book history classes or during fundraising events. Given the nature of our library, the University of Research Library, the primary goal of any conservation treatment performed in our lab is to give access to our material. All our treatments try to strike a balance between reestablishing lost functionalities and minimum intervention. It was decided to prioritize the consolidation of the binding over any treatment of the illuminations or text, which was postponed to a later date. The first couple of questions that came to my mind while planning the treatment were, can I create a new board attachment without touching the copper alloy strips on the spine edge of the board? Can I reback it while keeping those strips in place? Now, for the non-book conservators here, These are not trivial questions, because traditionally, to ease the rebacking, those strips would have been removed by cutting or pulling out the original nails, and then reattached with the original or new nails and possibly glue. I was trying to minimize the invasiveness of my treatment without compromising its functionality. The core of my presentation will focus on presenting the main techniques that helped me answer those two questions in a positive way. They include how I extended the sewing support for the new mechanical board attachments, how I prepared the boards for them, how I aligned the spine to improve its movement and provide additional glue-based board attachment, how I rebacked the line. This is a simple rendering of my original plan for a standing cord. New linen thread in white, longer than the spine width, wrap the original support in brown, and are secured to them by a simple cross stitch. The increased numbers of loops at the joints counteract the high forces applied to the joint areas while opening the cord. I was not concerned with the increased diameter of the frame support because I was not planning to reuse the ovate shape of the original spine. The added linen thread would have protected the original support without interfering too much with the natural behavior, and, given the size of the volume, would have not compromised the aesthetics of the new spine. It's not a new technique, it's relatively simple to execute. Unfortunately, just after completing one extension, my supervisor asked me to undo it and proceed with a different technique. I would not have mentioned this if you were not an integral part of the story of this treatment, and if you were not instrumental in understanding why the technique I eventually used was not my first choice. So this is what I ended up doing. It's a variant of one of the board attachment techniques described by Bernard Middleton in his famous book about restoring leather bindings. In this version, the two ends of the thread come out from the center of the section at the side of the sewing support. Several threads, similarly, added along the support every other few sections, form the extension that will reattach the board. The separate set of threads then secure it to the original support with single loops. Unfortunately, it's not clear enough for each of the I can send it better. My variation uses a single thread to form both the extension and the securing loop. Starting from the center of the spine and moving towards the joints, any new loop includes the previously formed extension and security support. Performed with the book closed in the press, it eliminates the dangerous need of opening the text block dozens of times to find and work at the center of the Jarvis. Both versions have applied in the toolbox of the book Conserving, but neither of them was the best option in this case. For two main reasons. First, they split the support in 3 segments, which act differently when the spine moves, creating areas where cracks might form and propagate to the line instruction and cables. Second, the distribution of applied forces during the opening of the boards is different. With any of these techniques on the left, any vertical pulling, the green arrows, is transferred to the original sewing in yellow, because the new thread in white directly pushes it. Otherwise, with the wrapping around technique on the right, any vertical pulling is distributed around the entire length of the new thread up to the attachment to the opposite. The original sewing is independent from it and under much less stress. Soon after creating the support extension, due to personal changes within my department, I was able to regain control over my work. Sorry, I had to say that. I planned and performed all the following steps of the treatment autonomously with the full support of my new supervisor. Mark, thank you. So, The original lacing-in holes were too large to be used. Smaller holes would have reduced any wobbling of the attached board, and the added material would have protected the original wood, which was quite thin on the holes. My solution was to use a cord as a jig. Its diameter was chosen to mirror the size of the ideal hole. This is how I proceeded. The template cord was wrapped in paper. The combo paper cord was introduced into the hole. All gaps on the spine edge and the inner board were filled with the pockets of cord fragments in gelatin. The goal was to obtain an extremely rigid filling and fix the combo composition. Once the poultice dried, the paper was trimmed and the loose cord removed. The pictures on the right show a hole before and after its size reduction. A minor advantage of this technique is that the laced-in new thread will be in contact with the softer paper instead of the rigid wood or cord gelatin filling. The next big conundrum was to design a spine lining that would have stabilized and reinforced the mechanical door attachment without disturbing the metal edges. It was immediately clear that the only practical option was to introduce the edges of the lining into the space between the boards and the metal edges and glue them down to the spine end of the board. The thickness of the boards, at least 15 millimeters, more than half an inch, made this solution feasible. The diagram in this slide shows my general plan for the multi-layer lining consisting of a paper barrier, a reinforcing cotton layer that will form part of the inner joint, and a double layer of animal skin that will form the outer joint. I decided to use 2 layers of skin to better manage the weight of the wooden board and alleviate the load of the primary sewing of the text block on the floor. The diagram shows continuous or overall linings, but only for better visualizing the certification. The actual lines were transversal panel lines. Moreover, nothing was stuck on top of the sewing screws. They were loosely covered by pieces of paper adhered for about 10 millimeters to the adjacent panels on top of the first paper barrier lining. To bypass the physical interference of the metal and be able to glue down the animal skins on the spine edges of the boards, I divided the lining process into several steps and combined the lining pieces into 2 symmetric 2-layer components. Component 1, 2, light brown, and component 3, 4, and dark brown. The 2 individual pieces making a component, for example pieces 1 and 2, are different in size. One covers the whole spine, the other only the joint area. By appealing to nothing in the edges of both components, which is shown in the diagram, once they are both attached to the spine, the overall thickness of the final lining equals to skin thickness everywhere, forming a uniform structure in a smooth, round surface. Those pictures describe the first step of attaching component 1, 2. It was glued down on the spine edge of the right board. Loose cotton was used to press it against the spine edge during the drying phase. It was eventually substituted by a poultice made of cord fragments and a combination of wheat starch and a small quantity of J304. The idea, or hope, behind this formulation was to avoid an uncontrollable shrinkage of the poultice deep inside the slot and provide a more flexible and shock-absorbent filling. It seemed to work fine in intended. After the poultice dried, the board was closed and the rest of component 1, 2 was glued down on the spine, second step in the diagram. This slide summarizes all the different board attachments. The support extensions were passed through the reduced holes, knotted on the inner board, trimmed, and glued down into the concave space originally carved into the board for the same purpose. Photos of the top. Sorry, More core gelatin filling will eventually create a level surface. The multi-layer lining provided the outer joints and part of the inner joints in the transverse cotton layer. Finally, the paper cotton gusset completed the inner joint and hid the whole structure. The final technique I'd like to present is the patched reback. I know it sounds weird, but it worked. It only added an aesthetical function since the structural strength was already provided by the various core tensions. The reback consisted of 3 steps: covering the gaps between adjacent panels of the joint, circled in green, covering the thick supports, circled in blue, and finally covering all the panels, pictured on the right. The gaps between the new cover and the head and tail, and the corners of the boards were bridged with several layers of paper, carefully arranged to make the transition both seamless and functional. The paper was eventually toned with acrylics. The implementation of this technique was greatly facilitated by using a height-adjustable book press, pictured at the bottom left corner, that allowed the antiphonary to be held in a vertical position, tilted at any end, and gave me the option to work sitting or standing. The press worked fine for this treatment, but presented some technical and practical issues. They were all addressed with a completely redesigned electrical version, currently used in our conservation lab, pictured at the top left corner. And that's all for the conservation treatment. I will now briefly describe a device that I designed and built to preserve the volume. It is a cart, a storage solution, and a cradle. The preservation goals were to eliminate the necessity to lift the volume, to simplify its general handling when in use, to facilitate its transportation around the library, and to allow its safe display and consultation. Additional logistic and practical goals were to minimize the overall dimensions of the device and to make it as user-friendly as possible. The device is made of aluminum plates lined with a black archival booklet, anodized aluminum profiles for the frame, Volara for the parking content of the letter spine of the volume, ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene for all areas in contact with the metal components of the binding. This material is inert, soft, and slippery. Stainless steel bolts and nuts in proximity of the volume, and black oxide steel bolts and nuts for the frame. Red stop latches and black adjustable levers to lock or release the movable component, and swivel casters with brakes. Once closed, the device is only about 3 inches longer and 60 inches wider than the volume. These numbers were obtained by including sliding components and by carefully compartmentalizing the space underneath the main box cradle structure at the top. This is the video. So the cassettes are unlocked. Apologies for my dress code, by the way. The stabilizers are released, slid down to the floor and locked. Their roll will be seen in a moment. The handle is unlocked and pulled to the left. The right side of the box is unlocked and open to the right. The left side of the box is unfolded. The volume is slightly pushed to the left and vertically tilted on the spine. So again, no lifting. Now the left board is laid in support. The right side of the box is closed back and becomes the support for the right board. Now the entire book can be read from beginning to end without needing any further physical adjustment. The stabilizers at the point of contact with the floor to prevent the whole structure from collapsing to the left with the cantilever position of the open door. Now for closing the box cradle, all actions are simply reversed. The right side is open. The book is laid back on the base of the box and slowly pushed to the right. The left side is folded back. And the handle is pushed back into the box as well. The right side is pushed back and locked. Stabilizer is slid back into the box and locked. I was forgetting something. The big fragments are stored in back sandwiches for easy consultation and circulation during classes or events. And the smaller fragments are stored in common zipper lock polyethylene. That's it. Thank you very much. I know you have lots of questions, all those details.
How long does that take?
Too long.
Couple of years?
Overall, yes. The problem was lack of continuity, I guess. You work for 2-3 weeks and stop for 3 months, and then you work for 2 weeks again and stop for 3 months. So overall, it took a few years. Construction of the box was a couple of weeks. Design was a really long. It's all made in house. Yes.
Did you tweak the box or do prototypes in cars or models?
That was one of the challenges. What you see is the prototype and the final product.
Yeah.
I had one chance. That was it. There was something that I had to change on the fly while I was building it. Oh, this whole I was able to figure it out. But yeah, I didn't have the chance to make even a little prototype.
What software are you using for the design?
This one was just a sketch. Now I'm using Fusion 360. But yeah, so I had to go from the screen to the actual device. It was a couple of weeks because we had an event here actually with donors. They wanted us to show it off. And so I had to rush, but eventually.
So it wasn't like James Webb Telescope running over there and saying, hey, what do you think? But
No.
not so much. It's
Just drawing it, obviously there was software, not that good. And then buying the components, some of those were cut to size on the copies of the helps me. And then just assemble everything. Yeah, it was a big challenge. It worked. Yeah.
So there was nothing commercial off the shelf that Needle could have provided, just had to fabricate it, basically.
Unfortunately, no. Bella. Which one?
Did
You
you,
can probably,
sorry,
no, sorry.
did you include a gasket on that piece as
No.
well?
No, so it's not sealed
Is
or
that
anything.
Yeah.
It's structurally very robust,
Uh-huh.
so literally you can, it's very happy.
And your blocking material was it Ethyphone, was it ester, or what was it?
So it was Volara,
Uh-huh.
cross-linked polyethylene, basically for the leather, for the parts in contact with the leather. And then the metal parts of the book were protruding from the text, so the volume. So for those, I used the ultra molecular weight polyethylene, which is very inert, very slippery and soft. So there is no damage to the metal. So yeah, it was a combination. I had to research a few things. And everything is mechanically attached. So if I have to remove a piece of polyethylene from trimetal weight, I just unscrew it. None of the screws, they're all countersunk, so one of them is near the original. The major problem was the weight of the original. It was more than 40 pounds. When somebody's on lab and I let him try holding it. It's really incredible. It's very difficult to handle. It's very, very difficult. So I had an excuse to do something different. My new boss allowed me to do that. I went for it.
It's beautiful. I mean, you're all invited at any time. Come to the lab at Hopkins on the campus. It's really our showpiece. It stays in the lab. We show it off. It's really amazing. I can't say enough wonderful about it.
If I had to make it now, maybe I would do it a little bit different. But hey, maybe one day. Version number 2. Yes.
What is the content of the book?
Oh, the Antiphonary, that's right. It's a collection of, well, it's a music book. So it was used in monasteries or churches to sing, which is why it's that big. So it was, let's say, there and another part, singing, looking at it and singing. It's a very typical, it's the only, we have a few different in our collection. In Italy. I think my thesis is one of those, we have 20 left at the same time. Yeah, they are fantastic. They are unique pieces of manuscripts. So, this one was the 15th century from Italy. Lombardy, where I come from, actually. The parchment had hundreds of skin. It's amazing. It's not top quality of all, let's say. If you go through the lips, you can tell this was kind of patched in there. It was a tool they were using constantly. It was not shelf. It's a tool. Yes.
I have a question for Jennifer, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, more than okay.
Yes.
So I know you didn't get a chance to talk about the treatment, but now that the survey is done, is that treatment ongoing? What are the plans like long term for the collection?
Yeah, so there were a few items that Laura treated leading up to the exhibit. So if you go, you might see some of those. Our workflows are largely exhibit and research and classroom driven. So that's and donor driven. We haven't had an adopted book event since the pandemic, but I assume we will. So that's so. I guess at this point, treatment wise, we won't do too many more treatments unless it comes up for classes or research use. We kind of treated what we needed to treat for the exhibit. So Laura, when she comes back, she'll be working on the survey, and we did consult an objects conservator about cleaning some of the embroidered straw, the stoop, and the portraits, just doing some light surface cleaning, because they are so encrusted with dirt. So she might do that, but otherwise she's probably gonna work on other collections, I would imagine, treatment-wise, and just trying to round out her portfolio.
Collection will be stored.
The collection will live here at Evergreen, and so we have our collections move a lot. It's one of the reasons we end up intervening in our treatments more than maybe a museum or other institution. Our books travel between here and Peabody and the main campus, and when they're used a lot, and they're used heavily. And so our treatments really have to be robust and stand up to heavy use.
Thank you guys.